This is a screencast on how to share quantities and given ratios. Now before we begin, we just need to go over a couple of the terms in here that you can see. So the first one is quantities. Now the quantity of something is how many there are. What is the number of them? How many? It's just a fancy mathematical way of using it. It's what mathematicians use to describe the amount of something. So how many? Ratios is important as part of this. Ratios. Now we're just going to focus on the word ratio. And what that means is it is about how two numbers compare. Okay. So what we mean by that is it's the comparison between the size of one number to another. And you'll see in the example that we do next how that plays out and how that will help you to understand. So the size of one number to the size of another. Okay. So keep that in mind. Quantity is about how many, and ratios is how two, better spell that right, numbers compare. So in front of you here we have a pancake recipe. This is to make the pancake mix so that you can make pancakes. This is the recipe I just used over the Easter weekend. Made it with my daughter. And you can see with all I've done with the particular recipe is just taken the ingredients, and you'll notice that down the left here it gives you the quantity of each thing. So you need 1.5 cups of milk, 3.5 cups of tea, 3.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of white sugar, 1.25 cups of milk, 1 egg, and 3 tablespoons of melted butter. Now I just might make this a little bigger so you guys can see it. Now this recipe was made for 4 people. That's something that you can't see on this. So 4 people. Now let's imagine over the Easter break I was going to have to cook for 10 people. That's a lot. Sorry. Going to have to cook for not 10 people, I was going to have to cook for 40 people. But I wanted to still use the same recipe. So what we need to do is a little trick to help us do this. We need to keep everything in the ratio. So if I just move this down over here now, move this over here, and I can show you. Now what we mean by the ratio is, and this is before we move on, is the ratio is the important part here. What we need to remember is that for every 1.5 cups of flour there needs to be 3.5 teaspoons of baking powder. For every 3.5 teaspoons of baking powder there needs to be 1 teaspoon of salt. For every teaspoon of salt there needs to be 1 tablespoon of white sugar, and so on and so on and so on. All these numbers here are the ratios, how they compare, so that we can keep our recipe consistent. Now you heard me mention I'm cooking for 40 people. So if you look at this back over here, the difference between these two numbers is that to get from 4 to 40, you times it by 10, multiply it by 10. Now because this recipe is for 4 people, I'm going to multiply each of these numbers down here so the ratio stays the same by 10. So for 10 people the recipe is then now going to look like this. Rather than having 1.5 cups of flour, I'm actually going to have 15 cups, or if you like 1.5 times 10, which is equal to 15 cups of flour. Now rather than having 3.5 teaspoons of baking powder, I'm going to go 3.5 times 10 again, times 10, because over here there's 10 times as many people, and that's going to give me 35 teaspoons of baking powder. Then I'm going to have 1 teaspoon of salt times 10, which equals 10 teaspoons. 1 tablespoon of white sugar times 10, which is equal to 10. 1 1/4 egg, so 1.25 times 10, which is equal to 12.5 cups of milk. In terms of eggs, I'm going to go for 1 times 10, which is equal to 10 eggs, and then 3 times 10 gives me 30 tablespoons of butter. So what you can see, what I've done here is I've kept everything in the same ratio. So by doing this, by multiplying these numbers by 10, has given me the same ratio to make sure that the recipe stays the same, so that it tastes the same as if I was cooking for 4 people. Let's take a look at another example. Whoopsie, rub that out. This time, let's imagine, you remember that, let's move this, make it slightly bigger again. Now rather than saying I'm cooking for 4 people, let's make this slightly easier, because 40 people is a bit extreme. It's a lot of pancakes and a lot of ingredients and a lot of frying pans and a lot of ovens to be able to do that with. Slightly unrealistic. But let's say that we had, remember this is for 4 people, this recipe, and let's imagine I had 8 people coming over. Now you'll notice here that 4, we've now doubled the people that are coming. So we have to double the ingredients here to make sure that we have enough pancakes to feed everybody. So we go 1.5 cups, or 1.5 cups, times 2, which equals 3 cups of flour. 3.5 cups, 3.5 times 2 is equal to 7 cups, and so forth and so forth. And so, and you just go through and multiply them all by 2, because there's double the amount of people. So just to recap, what are the things to do with ratios and quantities? What things do we need to remember to do? We can remember to use multiplication. To keep the ratios the same. And also, so it's a key step, and what we do to one quantity, we must continue that same ratio for the other ones. So you multiply them by all the same number. Good luck.